You know, one of my favorite types of reviews that we've recently been doing at TFL is old versus new. And coming up right now, that's right, we've got a new GTR versus a new McLaren. So how is this old versus new? Well, let me explain. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Roman, you've got two brand new cars. How is this an old versus new review? Well, the GTR was introduced in Tokyo in 2007, and this came out in New York in 2015. So the GTR is in effect 10 years old, and this is brand new. And that is how this is an old versus new review. This car accelerates so hard, it gives you tunnel vision. I can show you what I mean. Should I show you? Why not? You know, it almost feels like those front tires are doing a wheelie. It's pushing that hard. For a two-wheel drive car, that has got to be some of the most exhilarating, some of the most you know what, crazy acceleration you can get. Back in the day when this GTR was introduced, you could buy it for well under $100,000, but not anymore. This Nismo GTR is $178,000, and that's because it's got a whole bunch of carbon fiber, it's got a red engine cover, it's got special wheels. You get the idea. This is a special edition GTR. So for $30,000 more, you can get the McLaren, but as ultra high performance cars go, these compete directly. You know, when Godzilla first came out, it literally stomped on all the competition. 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, all-wheel drive, a lot of electronics that would keep you both on the road and on the racetrack, making you a better driver than you are. But now, of course, it's getting a little bit, well, a lot dated. But there's a whole bunch of trick aero on this car. It also feels a lot more modern. But really, to tell the difference between the two, a proper old versus new review, we have to get behind the wheel. You know, Godzilla just feels like an old friend. I've driven a lot of Godzillas over the years, and there is a real sense of familiarity about this. It's not particularly exotic. It does whir and fart and burp when you first start it up, with all that technology that's baked into this car, making sure that 600 horsepower keeps you going where you got the car pointed instead of where the natural kinetic motion of so much power would want to take you. On the other hand, it does feel heavy. You can really feel the mass of this car. Part of the issue, of course, is that it's got an all-wheel drive system that adds a lot of weight. Not to mention the fact that it's got 4 seats, and of course the fact that it's got a solid roof. But overall, this is a car you could pretty much drive every day. And people do. Under the hood of the McLaren, and that is all you're going to see because you have to take it to the dealership to actually get at the engine, is a 3.8 liter twin turbo V8 that puts out 562 horsepower and 443 pound-foot of torque. It is mated to a 7-speed dual clutch transmission that only powers the rear wheels. But unlike the GTR, this car does have a pretty cool party trick that may be worth the additional $30,000 it cost. Let me show you. Yep, what you're looking at is a Spider. It's, in fact, a convertible. So, you do pay more, but for that you get the glorious sunshine that beats down upon your hair and lets nature come in. Listening to the purr of a twin turbo V8 has got to be one of the greatest sounds that could come from behind your head. Of course, that's another difference between this car and the GTR. That's a front-engine car. This is a mid-engine car. But perhaps more importantly, this McLaren weighs 3,300 pounds. It is a lightweight car compared, heck, a featherweight car compared to that GTR. Because if there's one thing that a GTR isn't, that is of course light. And all that means is that this car feels like it's on its tippy toes, like it wants to dance. The steering is direct, almost hardwired to your brain. You can feel the pivot point of the engine as the car rotates around these corners. See, I told you it's got a red engine cover, but seriously, this is a hand-built 3.8 liter V6 that produces 600 horsepower and 481 pound-foot of torque. Now, of course, it's powered through a 6-speed dual-clutch transmission that, unlike the McLaren, provides power to all 4 wheels. 10 years is a long time for a car to essentially remain the same. Yeah, they have done some small updates. The transmission has been made a little bit more bulletproof. When they first came out, if you use launch control too much, you can detonate it. They have updated the interior a little bit. They've changed the styling around a little bit. But in general, if you were to get into the one from 2007 and this one, they'd be very similar. I think there's no better definition of the word scalpel and sledgehammer. Now, style-wise, this is very understated, very aero, very minimalist, except of course for the color. Now, Godzilla here, this is like a fist into the wind, and it's looking pretty dated. And you know, I've driven a lot of fast cars in my life, including McLarens, and I have to say that this car is some of the most direct, some of the most hardwired reflexes of any car that I've driven. It just wants to go fast. You know, some cars, you drive them and you look down and you're going 10 miles an hour under the speed limit. This is one of those cars where you look down and you could easily be doing 100 miles over the speed limit. It's that fast. In fact, it's got a top end of over 200 miles an hour. Did you know that when McLaren introduced the 570, it actually tripled the sales of McLarens around the world? That's how popular it was for the brand. Now, of course, the McLaren has a frunk, which actually, let me show you, it's pretty decent. But there's no glove compartment, there are barely 2 cup holders, and there's certainly no back seats. Now, follow me over here. The GTR not only has 2 seats that I can't fit into, but let's say your kids can. It also has this massive spoiler, of course, but a really good sized trunk, big enough to easily swallow our gear bag. And if you were a golfer, you could probably get 2 sets of golf clubs in here. When you think about the fact that this car was first introduced in 2007, that means it was probably designed 5 years before then. So you're really looking at 15-year-old tech. And in supercar terms, you know, that is more than an eternity. However, having said that, this car is so capable. There's so much baked in goodness that even 10 years after it was introduced, it can still hold its own with much more modern cars like the McLaren. And in case you guys are wondering, I'm here just outside of Portland, Oregon. It's part of the Automotive Video Awards. The AVAs, we're a group of YouTube car reviewers that are going to be selecting the best car and crossover / SUV of the year. So be sure to stay tuned for that. This is such a hardwired car. I mean, it's athletic to the point of it seems to do stuff that I haven't even thought about before I do it. And yes, this blue certainly does add to the character of driving this. If there's ever a car that screams, "Give me a ticket," this has got to be it. While the styling may be subtle, this combination of light blue, black, and cream interior is just, as the British would say, delicious. All right, so if it were my money, which of these 2 incredible cars would I buy? Now, at just over $30,000 in difference between the 2, there is no doubt that I would go for the McLaren. It's just a much more modern, much more, well, exotic car. You won't believe how many people stopped and gave me a thumbs up driving this car. But if we had a regular GTR here that starts at about 110,000, then my decision would be much more difficult, because even though this is getting old, it is still one of the most fun, one of the most powerful, and one of the most capable cars that you can buy, especially with all-wheel drive. Now let's just be clear about this. Normally when we do an old versus new review, it's an older version of the same car competing against the modern version. Now of course here, just to be clear, we have a brand new McLaren and a brand new GTR, but this GTR, well, it's 10 years old. So old versus new, you get it. I hope. You get it, right? Tell me you get it in the comments below.